Hello and welcome to Widmo. I'm Amir and today I'm going to talk about a very important hardware performance issue. This thing could easily turn into a bottleneck and slow down your entire workflow. And that's the speed of your hard disk, especially if you're working off of an external hard disk, which I think most of us do. To test the speed of your hard disk, you need a software and you can download Aja system test from aja.com and it looks like this. The software is pretty simple. I mean, you specify the resolution in here, the codec in here, and the target hard disk in here. So for instance, if you're working on a HD project, you can select HD in here, or if the codec is ProRes 422, you can specify it in here, and you select your target hard disk, the one that you want to test in here. I mean, this is very important. Okay, so let's run a test and see what we get. I know that this one's an SSD, so it's pretty fast, but this number alone doesn't tell me anything. So if I change it to frames per second, now this makes sense. We know that PAL is 25 frames per second and NTSC is 30 frames per second. So this number must be higher than the FPS of your project. So if you're working on a PAL project, which is 25, this number must be higher than 25. So now let's run more tests. Let's say I'm going to work on a 3K red project and the codec will be ProRes 444. So now because the frame is a lot larger and codec is much heavier, I get less frames per second. Now, I'm not talking about layering footage on top of each other. I'm not talking about effects. I'm just talking about bare bone editing. Now, let's run more tests on other hard disks. So I'm going to change the target hard disk to home, which is an external USB hard disk, and run the test again. Now we see the lag. Now we see the problem. This hard disk on the same machine can only handle 7 frames per second, which is really low. So if your footage is on this one, and if you play it back inside Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro X, it's gonna be really slow. You may say the workaround is to use proxies, and let's say if I run a test with ProRes proxy, yeah, it works. So if I want to work inside Final Cut Pro X, I can use proxies, and even this slow, old, modest hard disk could handle this project. Okay, let's test this one with FireWire connection. Okay, choose other, Phoenix, open, and you can already see that this one is much faster than this, and it can handle almost 22 frames a second. So this is better for a project like this, but it's still not good enough. And one last thing. You should basically worry about this one. I mean, this is when you read from this hard disk, which most of the times when you're editing, you're reading. Writing is for rendering and exporting and some other stuff, but this is basically what you should be concerned about. Okay, enough about these numbers. Let's go to Final Cut Pro X. Now inside Final Cut Pro, go to Final Cut Pro menu, Preferences, Playback, and make sure to turn these two on. We want to know if our system drops a frame during playback, and go to View and switch it from better performance to better quality. Now we know that our external USB hard disk is not fast enough to play the ProRes 444. So let's play it back and see what we get. Okay, yeah. Dropped frame, dropped another frame, and dropped frame. How about 422? Again, the same story. And the same thing is true about Premiere Pro. This one, the USB hard disk is not fast enough and it cannot keep up. Now, one thing that I should mention is that If you go to sequence setting and turn this one off, maximum render quality, and turn off high quality playback and decrease playback resolution, you will have a better performance. And the same thing is true inside Final Cut Pro. If you switch this back to better performance, it will use as many tricks as it can to play back everything smoothly. So now if I turn it back, you will see that I don't get any errors. And here's the rule of thumb. If the number in here is almost 30, so let's say I need 30 frames per second, but this one is 28, 27 something, you will be able to get away with it if you use this option. But if it's like 10 or 9 or 12, it means that that hard disk won't be able to keep up with your project. I just wanted to mention a few more things. First of all, if you run this test 10 times in a row, you will get 10 different numbers. They won't be the same. And the reason for it is because at that time the hard disk might be spinning faster or slower. So you should run this thing a few times and get an average. If you want to buy a hard disk, it's better to run this thing on that first to make sure that it's okay for your project, and then you're 100% sure that it can do what you want it to do. And finally, if you're connecting your external hard disk to an adapter, first plug your hard disk directly to your system, run the test, write the numbers, and later plug it to your adapter and run the test again and compare those numbers. Sometimes these adapters could slow you down and turn into a bottleneck. Okay, that's it for me, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and happy editing.